Hello, and welcome to the Fire Mountain Gems and Beads Jewelry Making Studio. I'm Lisa Pavelka, and I'm going to share with you one of my favorite projects. I believe that you make better art when you do it with a piece of art in your hand. You can embellish just about any tool handle that's bakeable, and anything that's metal or wood is bakeable with polymer clay. We're going to be working today with the new FIMO Professional clay, a new favorite of mine, and one of my texture stamps to make what is traditionally referred to as Mokume-Gane, which is Japanese for wood grain metal. That's a technique that was developed many centuries ago and used as an art form and adapted into different mediums, and polymer clay is just one of those mediums. I like to call this take on Mokume-Gane Stamp-e-Gane. Now, there's so many ways to do mokume-gane, and even with a stamp, there's so many variations you can create, including ones that are very exact replicas of the pattern of the stamp you're using. That's not the one we're doing today. We're going to make one a little bit more abstract, and it all begins with 2 to 4 colors of FIMO Professional clay. And I've already taken the chance to precondition them, which is getting them nice and soft, kneading them or rolling through my pasta machine and rolling them out. This last color here, I'm going to roll out one more time. My fold is always at the bottom. And I used about a half a block of clay. That should be enough to create my Mokume-Gane block. Now I'm going to stack these in no particular order. And I'm going to take a stiffer clay blade and cut down through them and trim them into a uniform size. One of the things that's really great about the FIMO clay is that when I do this, generally you can pull the clays apart cleanly so that you can separate the colors and use them again individually. But we'll set those scraps aside. Now I'd like to thin this into thinner layers, so let's take a look at the layers like that, and how about like that? So I'm going to compress them and stretch them a little bit, making them even thinner, and reset my machine to the largest setting. You need to know what number that is. It's not always the number 1. Sometimes it's the number 9 or 7 or even 6. So we're going to roll it through, and that's going to force any air out between them. It's going to make our sheet bigger. And again, with the stiff blade, we're going to cut it about in half. And don't worry that it's not perfect. You don't need to trim it all up. And I'm going to stack it. And I smooth it down from one end to the other. That eliminates getting air bubbles trapped inside. I'm going to cut it again and stack it. Can you guess what comes next? That's right, I'm going to cut it again and stack it. And you notice that each time I cut it and stack it, I'm doing it so that the colors remaining alternating. So now I have a nice loaf, a nice big block to work from, but we're going to set this aside for right now, because I'm going to show you how we create the base layer of our tool. So I'm working with an aluminum hobby knife, and of course we want to remove that blade first. We don't want to work with that blade in place. And I'm going to remove the collet and the collar that holds the collet in place. That leaves me with this portion right here for my handle. So I've preconditioned and rolled out usually about the 4th or 5th largest setting. If it feels too thin, you have to be the judge. Go back to a thicker setting. But it doesn't have to be terribly thick unless you want to enlarge the width of your handle. So we start with a clean line on one end, a clean straight line that's parallel to the length of our tool handle. And we're going to cut the clay so that it's the exact width of the tool handle. Now I'm going to get my glasses on here so I can see a little bit better. Now you don't need any glue to hold the clay onto the tool handle. It's going to attach right to it. Works a little bit easier on metal than it does on wood, but we're going to lift this up like so, smooth it down, and I usually roll it back to get any air out. Now you can use a straight cut like that, but I like to come in with my blade, and I like to very carefully cut at a beveled angle. This way, when I seal the clay together, it's going to overlap at angles, and it will hold together much better. So now we're going to roll it up, over, until it touches itself, and back. Now sometimes that happens, that little tear, and that's okay. It's just perfect spot for me to trim. I'm going to pull that back away. Now you can see that line there in there. And I'm going to come in right above it, holding my blade at a 45-degree angle away from me and away from the handle, and trim that, removing the excess clay. Now, this should meet just exactly, it should abut exactly at 45-degree angles to itself. If it overlaps just a little bit, don't worry about it. We'll smooth that out through rolling. If it's too short, you can stretch it a little. I'm going to remove it from this Teflon paper and go directly on my work surface, rolling it over. Let's see how I did. Pretty good. Pretty much met up everywhere I wanted it to. Maybe needs a little bit of help on this end. Okay. Now, with the flat pads of your hand, you're going to gently roll it with light pressure back and forth and make sure that you meld that seam together. So you shouldn't be able to see it. Let's take a look at how we did there. Nope, no seam. And just to make it easier for me, I trim off the excess. We're going to have to repeat this, but I just don't want to cover more clay than I need to with my design. Okay, so we're ready to set this aside and come back to our block or our loaf. Now I'm going to take one of my texture stamps, and I like this Ancient Doodles because this creates all kinds of interesting patterns. And you can use a release agent, which is an automotive protectant spray that's designed to make your tires shiny after you wash your car. Armor All or STP Son of a Gun are the common names you'll find them under. And I'll spray the clay. It doesn't matter which side or which color. And I'm going to just press it down randomly. I'm just going to use my hand. You can use a roller. And you're going to get an embossed design. Now you might have to repeat this 2 or 3 times before you start getting elements that you want to put on the base layer of the clay. We're not looking for a very specific pattern. We're looking for random visual interest. But on the raised area, and I just switched to a more flexible blade, very carefully and slowly slicing, I'm going to take off as thin a layers as I can. Now, not much interesting is happening just yet. That's not unusual. Let's go back and do it again. The harder you press and the deeper the impression, the sooner you're going to start seeing very cool things happening. But it's really important that you get those layers of clay thin to start with. Now let's see what happens here. Now you're going to find that when you slice, and you get better at this, a lot of times you're looking to get slices that have holes in them. Now that is more interesting, but it's still not quite what I'd like to see. So let's shave off a little bit more. Now as you work down through your block, you're going to find that sometimes the more interesting visual elements of your mokume-gane or your Stamp-e-Gane are on the surface. So you can shave those and use those face up. But more often than not, you're going to find that the visual interest lies underneath. So you'll flip it over. So when I'm at this stage and I have pieces I'm not real crazy about, I'm just going to load them up on the bottom and just keep my stack a little thicker. Usually a stack like this is enough to make anywhere from half a dozen or so handles, or even more if you get real good at slicing. So usually by this 3rd time, this is when we're going to start seeing something really fun and exciting come along. So fingers crossed. Let's see what's going on under this. That's much better. And it's going to continue to get more and more variegated and interesting as I go along. So what I start to do when I start seeing patterning that I'm happy with is I flip them over and set them aside before I do this again. And I start layering pieces onto the base of my pen. Now I chose a 4th color because I want to see some contrast. So we'll set this aside for a moment. We're going to pick up our Embellish craft tool. And I'm going to start laying down these very thin pieces, the thinner the better, randomly all over. And when I run out of interesting pieces, I'll repeat that process until I have enough to cover the handle to my liking. So let's just move this along real quickly. This is a real big piece, and I want to make sure I have some black showing through. So it's not unusual when I create a piece to cut it up and use smaller segments. And then you can start filling in little gaps with these tiny little speckles that you get laying around. So this should create something very interesting. Now, I think you get the idea. I'm not going to cover the whole handle at this point. I'm just going to finish with what I have. I can always go back and finish it later. But what we want to do now is embed everything into there, into the base of the handle, so it's seamless and it's perfectly smooth. I'm not looking for texture with a project like this. I want my handle to be smooth and comfortable in my hand. So once you've got the whole piece covered, you're going to go over it again, and I prefer the palm of my hand rather than my fingers. You can get grooves with your fingers. And in this case, we don't want it to be groovy. So I'm rolling it, and sometimes you can even take something like an acrylic block or a ceramic tile and use that if you find that you're not getting a nice smooth finish. I'll even finger polish it so that when it's baked the first time, it's going to require a lot less sanding or buffing when I want to make it shiny. So even if I want to come back, I can later finish this up and do the same thing. Add in the negative space, more of those shavings, and just embed them back into place. But if I were happy with it and ready to bake, I would go ahead and trim any excess clay away. Sometimes I do the top and bottom edge, or you could just roll that edge in, and I leave that open or I bring it closed. And I'm going to bake this for about 10 minutes in my oven. It's temporary heat setting. It's going to feel like it's cured, but it's not reaching optimal strength. It's going to need at least 20 to 30 minutes at 230 degrees to reach the optimal strength for the clay. But when it comes out of the oven, I like to do a little embellishment. And I'm a slave to the sparkle. I know a lot of you are too. So I've got my baked piece here. You don't have to add the collet and the collar back, but I find it makes it a little easier to handle it. So I've got this end here that's not quite finished, and it needs something a little fun. So I'm going to take some clay, and I think I'll do the green here, and I'm going to make a small ball. Now when I work with the Swarovski flatbacks, you can use hot fix, which are nice because when you press them down into clay, the heat of your oven is going to activate that glue. But it's not absolutely essential that it's a hot fix. So if you have regular non-hot fix flatbacks at hand, you can use those as well. I'm going to use just the tiniest dab of polybonder glue, and that is the glue that's the high temperature glue that's designed for bonding clay to clay. Raw clay and baked clay don't like to stick together at all, so this glue will fuse them together instantly. So I'm going to press that ball down so it's not quite flat, but it makes a nice circle around the top. And then I'm going to love this tool. This is the Crystal Katana, developed by my friend Kelly DeFries. And this is a magical tool for picking up all shapes and sizes of crystals. So I'm going to take this large flat back here, and it doesn't really need any glue, and I'm going to set it into place like so. And I'm actually going to use another little tool that's fun. This is from one of the texture sets that you can get at firemountaingems.com, and it's a ball tip stylus, but see, it's got a little cup tool here on the end. Let's take a look at it from there. That cup tool is just a little bit bigger than the table of my stone and not as wide as the girdle or the outer edge. So when I go to push it in, I'm not going to slip off. And let's see what happens. I'll hold this at a bit of an angle. Can you see the clay rising up and around the crystal? It's forming a naturally occurring bezel that locks that crystal in place. So that crystal should pretty much be there forever. If it does pop out on you, use a little jeweler's cement and put it back into place. It's going to go in the oven for the final baking. Again, that's 20 to 30 minutes at 230 degrees Fahrenheit, always in a preheated oven. And then you've got a beautiful piece of art to create more art with. I invite you to check out all the gorgeous colors and the color recipes available for the FIMO Professional line at firemountaingems.com, my texture stamps, and I want to wish all of you happy claying.